I think it's fantastic. I mean, I've learned a lot already in the first, whatever it is, half an hour we've been talking. Can we talk more about release work and limiting belief? Hi again, everyone. Today I'm having a chat with Ray, who's an NLP coach from the East Coast of America. Super interesting conversation. I don't want to waste much time. I'll dive straight into it. We got talking about the 4 requisites and the ability to change patterns of thinking and things that you're stuck on. I personally found it super helpful and learned a lot for myself. I just encourage you to watch the conversation. If there's anything you're stuck with, I think you'll learn a hell of a lot from the conversation Ray and I have. So enjoy. Well, I would just roll straight into it. I mean, I read the post you sent me on Buy Me a Coffee talking about NLP. And when we spoke in our first chat, NLP is, like I said to you, something that's always been of interest to me anyway. I think in the mental health, healing, psychology fields, there is so much that we don't yet understand that any tool or any course, practice, technique that's going to help people do better is okay with me. I don't know. I guess we can just roll into NLP because I've not spoken to anyone on my podcast about NLP before. I am familiar, having seen some stuff of Tony Robbins and other things in the industry. But maybe you can tell me what you think of NLP. And we'll have a little introduction of you. You said you became an NLP coach in 2016, a master in 2019, and a trainer, I think, in 22. Is that
2020.
Right? 2020. And now this is just your full-time gig, which is great. So you're just helping people with practices in NLP, non-linguistic programming.
Right.
I got that right?
That's correct. Neuro-Linguistic Programming. You got that right.
But there's a lot more to it than that. Maybe you can explain.
Sure, I'd be happy to. And I appreciate the conversation. I love talking about this stuff. So the Neuro-Linguistic Programming was developed back in the early 70s by John Grinder and Richard Bandler. And when they created it, I think that Richard Bandler, in my opinion, has the best definition of what neurolinguistic programming is. And I'll refer to it as NLP. That's how it's often abbreviated, not to be confused with natural language processing. So NLP, neurolinguistic programming, his definition that he gave it was that NLP is an attitude and a methodology that leaves behind a trail of techniques. Now, what I find fascinating about this and where NLP has kind of evolved too, that oftentimes when you talk to people about NLP, in my experience, they talk about the techniques. And because of that, I feel that people either love NLP or don't like NLP based on the techniques. And I think that that's only focusing on the second part of his definition. So when we look at the first part of that, it's an attitude and a methodology. And having read some of the original works, the idea is that it's an attitude of curiosity, and then the methodology they use is that of modeling. So they get curious about things. Hey, this person is creating this result, right? They get curious about, then ask, well, how do they go about doing that? And then they model that individual, that model of success. Now, the idea of modeling, I believe that the way that a lot of people see that is just, well, I just need to do what they do, when there are different layers to this. That modeling is more than just what someone's doing. It's beliefs, it's values, it's things that help drive the behavior. So when I think about NLP and when I, teach people and coach people and train people on this, it's the idea that it's more than just the techniques. It's an attitude of curiosity. It's the methodology of modeling. And by virtue of them looking at those successful people, getting curious and modeling their behavior, that's what left behind the trail of techniques. I could coach someone using NLP and we wouldn't necessarily have to use the techniques.
So to be clear, my understanding is it was modeled on very successful people and saying, why are all these people so successful? What is it about them that makes them successful? And they, took 1,000 people and went back and tried to find patterns between all of them of what they might do, how they might think, their attitudes, and basically re-engineered it, for want of a better way of explaining it. Is that correct?
So as far as the exact numbers of how many they looked at their
1,000 out of the air.
Sure. they looked at people like Virginia Satir. She was a social worker back in the 70s who was getting amazing results with her clients, and they studied her. They looked at people like Milton Erickson. He was a famous hypnotherapist. They looked at the language patterns he was using. And John Grinder and Richard Bandler wrote some phenomenal books. They're called The Structure of Magic, Volume 1, and The Structure of Magic, Volume 2. And they talk about how how language can be used to help create change. So they looked at people who were helping other people create change, and they came up with some extraordinary stuff.
Sorry, did you hear me?
You mentioned something about the books.
Yeah, sorry. I didn't know the titles of the books before. Can you just tell me again? Because it's super interesting. Now I want to look them up.
Sure. The Structure of Magic, Volume 1, and The Structure of Magic, Volume 2. Very interesting books. And one thing I think that's also important when looking at NLP is that, and when you read some of the original books on NLP, and again, NLP, like anything else, has evolved over the years, and
Sure.
definitions have changed and whatnot. One thing that they do talk a lot about initially is that it's not so much about it being true. And I do think we do have science to support some aspects of it. What they're looking for is what's useful. Now, in my practice, I like to ground things as much as I possibly can on what's true. And, I think about true in air quotes, right? Because like you started off this conversation with, we don't know everything yet. And there are some things that may not be true. And we could call these kind of metaphorical truths that if we believe them to be true, there may be some value in it. And then there are things that are true that we just haven't proven yet. And I think that NLP may be in that middle ground, because one of the critiques that it's often, discussed when it comes to NLP is that it wasn't scientifically made, and they never claimed, from everything I've read, that it would be, or that it was initially. They just said, hey, this person's experiencing results. What can we model to experience those same results? And I think and I think when we look at NLP in some cases as being helpful, I think that there's some wiggle room there with whether or not it's actually true. We've proven it to be true. It is helpful in some situations. And then there's other stuff, like I said, that science does support.
Well, it's also difficult because everyone is different. I mean, let's say there are 7 billion people on the planet. Everyone has seen things in different orders, in different ways, experienced learning cues or moments in their life that have left an impression on them in different ways, in different orders. That's why no two people are ever going to be the same. So NLP, or some NLP techniques, are going to work better for others, are going to be effective for some people, but are just going to be dead in the water for others. It won't be in our lifetimes that it gets solved, and it won't be in our lifetimes that psychology is solved, or anything in the mental health fields are solved. It's going to take time, and I guess we're just lab rats on the path in helping everyone in the future figure it out, I think.
Well, and with recent advance, oh, please forgive me.
No, please go on.
Yeah, well, I think with recent advancements in AI, I do think there may be an opportunity to figure some things out faster than we had originally predicted.
AI is an interesting one. I like messing with AI. I'll go on to OpenAI when I want to type something out or I need something. And sometimes I'll just throw it a question just to try and confuse it to see what it will come up with. But that's completely off topic. That's just the narcissist in me being an idiot, I guess. When we first connected, you suggested we talk about the 4 requisites. And I did a little digging, but I think that's where we were going to start focusing on, because I think this is something you practice with your clients, right?
Correct. It's the model that's the basis for everything I do with clients. At any given time, where we work through them, at any given time, we're working on one of those requisites.
Well, let's go through them. I mean, the first one is release work. We've got release work, create a compelling future, taking action, and maintaining focus. I've got that right?
You do. Yep, that's exactly right.
Where do we start? Or where would you start with a client? How would you help a client if they came through your door and they were just fresh off the boat, first session with you? How would you approach it? How would you?
That's a great question.
Sorry, I think at some point you have to have that intake session and maybe understand them a little better, what it is that they're looking for. But when we start digging into the process, I guess you start with release work, and where does it go from there for you?
That's a great question. And you are right. Initially, there's a conversation to make sure that I'm a good fit for them and they're a good fit for me, and I'm staying within my lane and I'm able to help them, right? So yes, like once we determine that that I'm their coach, I'm the guy that can help them. Well, we do start with release work, and my clients start in what we call a breakthrough session. And the breakthrough session takes care of the first two requisites, the release work and the creating the compelling future. So the release work, what we do initially, and I guess let me start with how I've seen a lot of people approach personal development or tackling goals or whatever endeavor they're pursuing. There's this idea of just, well, set a massive goal, take massive action, and then just kind of battle whatever comes up, right? Whether it's the limiting beliefs, the naysayers around you, whatever those things are. Now, I'm going to use the idea of running a business. Running a business is hard enough, right? You're going to experience challenges if you're running your own business. Well, if in addition to that, you're also waking up in the morning having to convince yourself that you're worthy of success, for example, well, now you're fighting two battles. So, what we do using some of the techniques of neuro-linguistic programming and another an amazing technique called mental and emotional release. The release work, that's the first requisite for change because we want to get rid of and release the emotional baggage, limiting beliefs, internal conflicts, things of that nature. And the word release there is important because there are a lot of techniques out there that teach people to cope or navigate. This releases. And that's why it's important to make sure that what they're experiencing is something they can work with, right? I want to make sure I stay in my lane and don't overstep. So we release those things up front because the next step is creating a compelling future. And to clarify, it's essentially setting a goal. It's a little more detailed than that, this compelling future,
Nuanced.
that the way someone views their goal drastically changes if they're seeing it through their baggage, limiting beliefs, emotional baggage, and things of that nature, or if they're crafting a goal unencumbered by their past. So we do the release work first because then the goal is set without all of the baggage. Then they can take action unencumbered by the baggage. And then they maintain focus on what they desire rather than what they don't want.
Super interesting. I mean, I think we can all relate to that when we think about limiting belief or something that's holding us back. I've been digging in a lot on one of my own courses that I run, looking at the fight, flight, freeze, fawn responses,
Mm-hmm.
and we've all got something holding us back. And yeah, I'm curious to know what you think, which limiting beliefs you might come up against most often. There must be some that crop up again and again and again for people, and there must be some common ones that you have to shake out. And in your experience with all the clients you've seen, you must have some experience in helping people.
What's interesting about the limiting beliefs is that when we look at what language is working to accomplish, that right now, for example, if I were to say the word dog, if you like dogs, you may have thought of a dog when you were little.
Dog is a super interesting one for me, actually, because I
Mm-hmm.
was attacked by dogs when I was very young. So for most people, I think dogs are a very positive experience. But for me, they used to be negative until I'd forced myself to get over it. So carry on. It's a great example.
Right. So yeah, and thank you for sharing that. So I say dog, and let's say you hadn't worked through this, right? Well, then you may have had the picture of that dog, which would have evoked some emotion in some mental or emotional state, and then that would have led to a behavior, right? If you had been scared for the rest of this conversation, you might have operated differently than if you weren't scared, right? So
Yeah.
the language we use, and I use this example of a dog, that we can both be thinking the same thing, or please forgive me, we can both be thinking about a dog, and the internal representation we have of that dog is different, and yet the language comes out the same. So the language that people use, let's just say that someone were to have, or we had two people side by side that both held the belief or believed that they held the belief, I'm not worthy. Well, those are simply labels they're using for something they have in their mind. So while yes, there may be some limiting beliefs that come up, like I don't want to say commonly, because out of the last several breakthrough sessions I've done, none of them were the same. And even if they were the same, I know that those are simply labels for something much different underneath the surface. I hope that's clear. Does that make sense?
Yeah, 100%. And it goes back
Yeah.
to what I was saying, that everyone is different. Yes, there are going to be some characteristics of our traumas and things that we've been through that mean three, four, five different people all feel themselves as not worthy, but there are different reasons why they think that.
Right.
Again, interestingly, I'm not worthy was something that I used to struggle with, and I don't
Mm-hmm.
anymore simply because of my own journey that I've been through, and I've helped myself. But maybe a few years ago, it would have been easier if I'd have spoken to someone like you who could have helped me through it. But no, like so everyone is different. Is my point.
Mhm.
Everyone is different.
And I think what's important there from a coaching perspective, because everyone is different, and I know that you have a lot of people in this space, mental health, coaching, and that type of stuff listening, and I'm sure this will resonate with you and a lot of other people that, let's say, for example, okay, so I'm going to use this mouse right here. Okay. If a client if I'm working with a client and they present to me a problem, and I'm going to say this mouse is their problem or their challenge, this is why I think it's critical when I'm working with a client for me to make sure their eyes are focused on the challenge and my eyes are focused on them. Because then I'm working through them, however they see the world, their limiting beliefs and whatnot, not how I see it. Because the moment as a coach, I shift my eyes to the challenge, I now become a professional problem solver. And one of my goals is to work through them so they become dependent, or they become independent, they become autonomous in handling their challenges rather than relying on me to solve their problems for them. So by virtue of recognizing that everyone is different, that's why we're going through them to get to their challenge, not me just looking at the challenge and saying, hey, here's how you fix it.
So how are we going to smash those limiting beliefs for people that you come up with, or your clients? Because as you said, at some point you're just a guide to help them through the work and help them
Mm-hmm.
understand themselves better and really take control. It's also what I try and teach in my courses. But
Mm-hmm.
people lack confidence. They don't have belief in themselves. They've been hurt so many times that at some point
Mm-hmm.
they need a guide like you to help them through that. What's your process? How do you approach this with clients? I guess every situation is different, but there must be some recurring themes.
So interestingly, the process is the same. So the process will be the same, and what comes out of their mouth, or like what's going on internally, that's the part that's going to differ. So for example, one of the philosophies I learned early on was that if you want to know what someone believes, watch what they do, right? So part of the discovery process, I don't ask clients what they believe. We do an exploration of events and then look for those commonalities to identify what are the beliefs that are driving this behavior. So that may sound kind of vague, and it's a very nuanced process. And by virtue of hearing
Well,
those stories, please forgive me.
no, it
Yeah.
didn't sound vague at all. I
Okay.
followed you. So sorry, carry
Yeah.
on. I shouldn't have interrupted you.
Oh, yeah, no worries. So yes, as people are sharing these stories, they're giving content. I'm essentially looking for context, right? Process, thought patterns, and things of that nature. And when we hear these stories, those patterns start to emerge, and we can start to identify beliefs that I've had clients who have told me, for example, well, absolutely, I'm worthy of success. And then we look at the patterns that they're running, and they're like, you know what? Like, I think that consciously, and that's clearly not what my behavior is showing. So then we can start to identify what the beliefs are, and then we have techniques that can start to work with those beliefs. And that's mental and emotional release uses things like associated and dissociated states, reframes, and learnings that allow us to change those things, or release those things so someone then can move forward unencumbered by them.
Super interesting. I mean, I almost wish we could go through a session and talk about it from my perspective, because I'm sure there's a lot I could learn from you, and I think my audience could as well. There's too much to go into in detail, isn't there? All of these different techniques, I guess.
One thing that, when I'm working with someone, and I think you'll appreciate this because I think you have the same type of integrity, that anything that would be done here would be so, like, it would be outside of the process. Like,
Mm.
yes, I mean, I can explain the process of mental, like, to a certain extent, I could do that, and without doing it properly, which takes 12 hours over 3 sessions, it wouldn't be like, I don't like to shortchange the process.
No, of
And
course not.
you know, so yeah, there are absolutely some things we can walk through, though, that I think that I mean, some tools and techniques that your audience may find value in. I'd be happy to do that.
Well, I think that might be a fun idea. I mean, there's no way we can dive into the whole concept of
Right.
NLP and what it is 2 hours that we're going to talk. Like you said, it takes more time. Maybe
Right.
give us a quick example, or I don't know, something you think you'd like to share that you might be useful for people.
Sure, absolutely. And this, what I'm about to do, and I want to make sure that, as people are hearing us walk through this, that I know that you've done a lot of work. So if someone hasn't done as much work, that what I'm about to explain may not resonate as much. And we can walk through this. So to use mental and emotional release, we use a construct called your timeline, right? So right now, if I were to ask you, and fascinatingly, well, let's go through it and then I'll explain. So if I were to ask you right now to point toward your past, what direction would you point? What's the first thing that comes to mind? What direction would you point? Cool, behind you. And if you were to point toward your future, which direction would you point?
In front of me.
Okay, very good. Now, that in front of me came across, well, like, yeah, of course my future's in front of me. And fascinatingly, you have people in your audience who just heard me do that, and they pointed left to right, right to left, or in some direction from their body. So we have this construct called a timeline. So we organize our time in different ways, and those are just two different ways. It's either front to back or left to right, right to left, and people can have timelines in all different directions. Now, what we're about to do is I'm going to walk you through a quick exercise, and this is something that helps with anxiety, right? And the positive reframe of anxiety is that anxiety, and again, people, there are a lot of different conditions that can that could have someone experience anxiety. So I want to be respectful here. That let's talk about a specific situation where someone is experiencing anxiety about something in the near future, right? Maybe they have to take a test, they have to give a speech or something like that, and they're feeling some anxiety around that one thing. Okay. Well, what we can do when we think about anxiety, to back up a little bit, it's our unconscious mind telling us something that we need to prepare for something, right? That if someone is anxious about a test, they probably aren't anxious if they think they're going to crush it, right? If they think they're going to ace the test. Generally, it's a negative story that we're telling ourselves of a potential negative outcome. And the positive reframe again is, well, if I'm anxious about the test, that's just my unconscious mind telling me I need to prepare more. It's a positive reframe on it, right? If I'm giving a speech, I need to prepare for the speech. Now, interestingly, if we were to look at this, and I'll do my best here, and I know there's video, I'll do this in front of my face, that if we have a line in front of us, and let's pretend that's the timeline, and here we are now, and here's the speech or the test, it doesn't matter. Well, the anxiety only lives between now and the test. Once the test is over, assuming the anxiety is only because of the test, there's no more anxiety because the test is done. Follow that so far?
Super interesting. Yeah, no, it's a nice way of framing it. Carry on.
Okay. So now what we can do is using this construct of the timeline, and if you're okay with it, I can use you as the person. Are you cool to do this?
100%. I would struggle with social anxiety and wanting to be accepted in groups when I was younger. So say if there was a big event or a party I was going to, that might make me anxious.
Do you have something coming up in the near future that you may feel a little anxiety around? It doesn't have to be big for the sake of this example, just something in the fuure.
No, I mean, there was a friend that I fell out with that we are part of a big friendship circle, and he went away for 2 months to America, and I haven't seen him. So I know I'm going to end up bumping into him. I'm sure it's going to be fine, but that does bring me a little bit of anxiety.
That's a great example. Thank you for that.
Mm-hmm.
Totally on board with that. Okay. So what I'd like you to do then, so your past is behind you, future out in front of you. What I'd like you to do is go ahead and close your eyes for me, Chris. Close your eyes for me. And what I'd like you to do is I'd like you to float up above your timeline. Float up above your timeline so you're above now, looking through your own eyes. Please make sure you're looking through your own eyes. Let me know when you've done that.
Yeah, I'm there.
And what I'd like you to do, Chris, is I want you to float out into your future 15 minutes beyond the first meeting of this friend that you bump into. Float out 15 minutes beyond that first encounter with this friend once you see them again. Let me know when you're there, please.
Yeah,
all right. Remaining above your timeline 15 minutes beyond that event, which you believe you're anxious about, remaining above and beyond this event, looking down on the event, I'd like you to imagine seeing yourself in that moment, you're 15 minutes beyond it, seeing a positive outcome, not Pollyanna-ish. Maybe you two aren't running towards each other in a loving embrace, and just a positive outcome, whatever that looks like for you, right? And what happens being 15 minutes beyond it, we're temporally outside of that space where the anxiety exists. And our bodies respond physiologically to things in our mind, similarly to as if we're actually doing them. So by maintaining that perspective 15 minutes beyond the event, looking down on the event, seeing that positive outcome, what you may find is that anxiety starts to drop. Because we're changing the story and temporally we're outside of that space, this is a pattern that we can run whenever there's something, again, something in the future specifically that we are that we believe we're anxious about, float up above the timeline, out into the future 15 minutes before, looking down and back on that event, seeing the positive outcome. So I'm curious, you can float back toward now if you'd like and come back into the room. What was that experience like for you?
Really interesting. Wonderful. I mean, I imagined we were in a bar that we'll probably end up in. I don't drink anymore, but all my friends still
Mhm.
do. Um, just having a hug and one of those big manly, you know, handshakes
Yeah.
and a hug and just say, "How are you? Nice to see you." And yeah, I don't feel as anxious as I did. It was quite a cool experience and an odd privilege to be able to look down on myself from above. Really, really cool. I was drawn, I was slightly distracted in the moment because I was drawn to the idea of Steph Curry and Kobe Bryant. Because what we're doing here, I assume, and you correct me if I'm wrong, is visualizing a positive outcome and just imagining that something is going to go right. And I think of them knowing that every shot they're going to shoot, and Michael Jordan's probably a good example as well, knowing that every shot they shoot over and over and
Mhm.
over is going in. So they're visualizing a successful outcome, something like that, right?
Right. The yes. So the what I like to emphasize to people, because we're talking about anxiety. So yes, having positive expectations, do things always go well? Absolutely not, right? And I believe that we're better off having the positive expectation in some situations than having the opposite. Now, when it comes to anxiety, the purpose of this is not to say that things will necessarily go well. And in some situations, or I guess that's why I stress the idea of positive rather than Pollyanna-ish. Because there are some situations where the positive outcome is just I'm okay, right? It doesn't mean things are great. It just means I'm okay. So yes, having that positive outcome, and we can talk about this in terms of goal setting too, if you'd like, that yes, having a positive outcome, I believe we're better off for it. This adds that element of being beyond above. So it changes the perception, right? And it's 15 minutes beyond outside of that temporally where it is. And by changing the story, being intentional about it, otherwise, and I don't know, I wasn't inside your head, Chris, that my hallucination is that first encounter in your mind, unintentionally, whatever came up from your unconscious may have been a less positive story than the one you just created. So there are a lot of factors there that it takes it, I think, a step further than just believing in the positive outcome.
I mean, super interesting to step out of it rather than just shifting, like you said, temporally and looking back on the situation from the future. Why do you sit above it as if you're looking down? Is it because it removes, I guess it removes you from the situation and allows you to look at it more objectively almost. Is that right?
That yes, and you articulated that very well. So if it's okay, I can use this in a form of goal setting, which I think your audience
Yeah,
may get
crack on,
value
please.
from. So as I
And this
mentioned, and it
is this
looked
creating a compelling future now?
no,
Is it when you say
it's
goal setting?
it's one of the tools we use to create unconscious momentum. That the crafting of the compelling future is different, to answer your question bluntly. And once we have the goal, this is a way that we can do some cool mind stuff.
Carry on. Sorry for interrupting you. I'm listening. Super
That's
interesting.
a great question, and thank you for clarifying that. So, as I mentioned, and I think you agreed with, that our bodies respond physiologically to things in our minds in a similar way as if it's actually happening. This is why, or I'll give a personal example. When I was in high school, I wrestled. And the night before a match, and I didn't know what I was doing at the time. The night before the match in bed, I'd be thinking about the match in my head, and I would start sweating or my heart would start racing because I'm seeing myself wrestling, right? Well, interestingly, what I was in is what we would call an associated state. I was in the match. I was looking through my own eyes. We call that an associated state. Dissociated, like we just did with the anxiety model, is we remove ourselves from it, so we're looking at it. We're seeing ourselves in the picture. Now, this is one of the cool things we can do with goal setting, that it's often taught, and I say often, again, like I'm speaking in my world of personal development, so I realize this is like most of what I look at. So if someone's new to this, they may hear the word often and like, I've never heard this before. Well, it's the world I live in, right? So this idea that it we're taught to visualize ourselves like having achieved the goal, right? Like and we're taught to embody it. That there's a movie and a book based on this concept, and I won't name either of those, that this idea that if someone, it's taught in the movie, where if like you want a Lamborghini, like if you see that in your future, what you want to do is picture yourself sitting in the Lamborghini, hands on the wheel, hearing the hum of the engine, feeling the vibration of the car, and you picture yourself in it. Well, yes, that's better than, I guess, not doing that. By using these associated and dissociated states, when we put ourselves into it, at some level, we think we have it. So what I do with clients is, yes, we go into what it would mean to accomplish it, like into that moment, looking through our own eyes, hearing everything we hear, feeling all the positive emotions. Then we dissociate from it. And dissociated states remove the feeling of it, because there is a difference between being in it and these associated and dissociated states. A lot of cool things we can do with them. What's cool though, and what my clients experience, is they're in it, they get all the positive emotion, they hear everything, they see everything in that moment of accomplishing their goal, and then when they remove themselves from it, it creates that, oh man, I want to go get that. And that's how we create the momentum toward the goal.
It's really cool. I mean, I've not studied NLP and I've not worked
Mm-hmm.
with an NLP coach before, but I'm drawn to start thinking about my own perception of
Mm-hmm.
negative thinking that I used to carry. And when I was stuck in a very depressed state of not having enough friends or feeling lonely or feeling kind of hopeless within my job, my career, my love life, or whatever, I was always looking at it through an associated state whereby it was poor me, this is never going to change. Look how bad my life is. This sucks. Oh God, I've got to go and do that again. Whereas
Mm-hmm.
now I'm in such a much different positive frame of mind that I'm actively looking towards the future, knowing I'm going somewhere successful. And I know I'm going somewhere successful, so I don't have to pretend. I can see the person that I'm going to be, how
Mm-hmm.
much I'm going to achieve through my business, the goals that I'm working towards. And I don't think I realized I was using NLP techniques without having learned them. It's super, don't know. I'm in a strange way, I'm kind of proud of myself, you know?
Well, so yes, I mean, tremendous credit for you for the work you've done, and that's cool that you did those things. And I think that this is also, this goes back to the idea that NLP didn't really create anything. They just looked at
No.
what successful people were doing and then just modeled that. So this idea of associated and dissociated states, it isn't new to NLP. They just said, hey, this works for people, we're going to model that behavior. So there's very little in my experience in NLP that, yes, they've put labels on things and they didn't actually create them. They just sort of cataloged all the things that successful people were doing.
I think it's fantastic. I mean,
Mm-hmm.
I've learned a lot already in the first, whatever it is, half an hour we've been talking. Can we talk more about release work and limiting belief, or can we go on to step two? I'm going to let you dictate the conversation. Normally, I'm the host, so I'm going to let you take over.
Sure. Well, the idea of release work, like I said, like there are certain techniques we use. There are NLP techniques. I happen to be trained in mental and emotional release. So that's initially the process. So I'm hearing stories. We're figuring out what those limiting beliefs are together, and then and digging up the emotional baggage, whatnot, releasing them, and then yeah, I think that leading on to the crafting of the compelling future makes sense.
Well, the floor is yours. Crack on. So this is step two, creating a compelling future. And I guess it's more than just visualization. It's and goal setting. Maybe it's a
Mm-hmm.
combination of the two. You walk me through it.
So there are a lot of components to this, and this is, when
Sounds like it.
when it comes to setting goals, and this is trying to think how I want to make sure I articulate this properly, that people know the importance of setting goals. Like they know having goals are important, right? Or I believe anyone in your audience recognizes that having goals are important. And when I think about something like a New Year's resolution, and this is not a suggestion because I don't like New Year's resolutions for a handful of reasons, and I'll use these as the example, that on December 31st, people have this list of goals that they're excited to hit on January 2nd because they know they're going out hard, so they're going to put off the first day. Goals start on January 2nd. Well, then what happens? What do these goals look like? This year, I want to write a book. I want to run a marathon. I want to lose weight. And it looks like a grocery list, like a to-do list. And it's uninspiring. And it's not surprising to me the way that those are crafted, that by January 18th, that's the drop dead date. And I'm sure if it's not exactly January 18th, it's somewhere around there. Most New Year's resolutions, people are done with them. And it's my hallucination that if you were to ask those people, when did you give up on your goal? There's no specific time. It's just a slow erosion of moving away from it. So those types of goals, this compelling future, one of the purposes of it is that on the days where you don't feel like getting up or you don't feel like doing whatever it is, that this is more compelling than all of those reasons. So we have these strategies that we go through to draw up some of this stuff. One of them is are the keys to achievable outcomes. This is one thing that NLP brings to the table. And it's a series of questions to start to dig up things like when you have it, what are you going to see, hear, and feel? Right. So, what are you going to see, hear, and feel when you have it? So, we start to bring in the different components that make up that internal representation of having accomplished the goal. Well, what evidence will be there so you know that you hit it? I know people that hit goals and have no idea that they accomplished them. So we get really specific on what that looks like. And then another part of this is identifying where we are now in relationship to the goal. And the analogy I like to draw here, it's like Google Maps. That if you tell Google Maps where you want to go and you don't have your GPS on and you don't know where you are currently, it can't help you. So to set a goal, it's important to know where we're going and it's important to know where we are in relationship to that goal, because then we have to fill in the middle, identifying like what resources do I currently have that are going to help me hit this goal? Who do I know who has done something similar? What resources did they have that I need to obtain? So we're really doing a deep dive to gather this information on all of these different things that, to make sure we're prepared for the journey. Just like taking a trip. Again, you need to know where you're going, you need to know where you are, you need to know what you need, and a handful of other things. Well, once we have gathered all of this information, and this is the part, even without all of that people can absolutely implement immediately on their goals, we then craft a narrative. Our goals are written, or these compelling futures are written in narrative form. And they're written using present and past tense verbs. Present and past tense verbs. So, for example, it may be something like, it is December 31st, 2024, and I have $10,000 saved in my savings account. Over the last several months, I did this, this, and this. I lived out my values of this, this, and this. And it's a story of everything from point A to point B of creating that compelling future. And we write it in the present and past tense because when we set goals that are in the future, it moves that, and I'm using this term energy colloquially, this idea that we're pushing that energy out into the future. That if I were to say I'm going to go to the gym tomorrow, well, when I wake up tomorrow, I don't have to go to the gym because the goal was to go to the gym tomorrow. Then I wake up the next day, I still don't have to go to the gym because the goal is to go to the gym tomorrow. So tomorrow never comes. So we pull it into the now, and by reading the goal as if now, present and past tense verbs, I act as if. That's the idea behind it.
Well, I mean, a lot to unpack there for me. I'll be honest, I was kind of panicking while listening to you talk because I haven't necessarily set any goals for the work that I'm doing. I I'm not driven by money or fame or houses and cars by this work because I simply don't want to see people go through what I went through in my life, which was a terrible struggle. So I'm actively working towards that. Yeah, I haven't set any goals or hard goals with an idea of what that looks like yet. I'm just trying to build and build and build and build for the future. It makes me think that maybe I need some goals and I need a narrative.
So when I work with clients, and this is one thing that
maybe you could give me some advice on that. I don't know.
So yeah, one thing I stress with clients is that here's the thing: someone could check every box of everything on the keys to achievable outcomes, everything well crafted in the narrative, good, well languaged, all of those things. It could be edited correctly to make sure it matches up with certain criteria. And it doesn't mean that they're 100% going to hit the goal. When I'm working with clients, I want to put them in the best possible position to achieve the goal, right? So do I have some clients who before working with me, uber successful? Absolutely. Never wrote down a goal a day in their life, right? And they happen to accomplish their goals. Okay. Now, could the path have been easier had they had this well-formulated plan? Maybe, right? So can someone hit goals without writing them down? Absolutely. By doing the release work and crafting the compelling future, it's going to be hard enough to do something big. I just want to remove everything that could possibly be removed. And I want people to be aware of what's ahead of them to give them the best chance of accomplishing their goal. So maybe having the goal, maybe you'll hit it anyways. And I am a believer that by going through this process, it fills in a lot of the gaps that sometimes people don't think about.
Also, goals exist on different time horizons. You can have goals for a week from now, a month from now, a year, or sometimes a decade from now. I follow Alex Hormozy, if you know him.
Mm-hmm.
He's an entrepreneur. He talks about thinking about business a decade ahead, which was never a time horizon that I'd ever been able to wrap my head around before now. And setting goals for 10 years into the future, I have no idea what I'm doing when I'm still going for the next week, the next month, the next year. But it's a super interesting process to even think about.
Yeah. And if I can just very quickly comment on the 10-year idea, that, when I work with clients, I recommend, and there's another strategy I'm happy to share here that'll help, I guess, maybe understand why I do this with clients, that I recommend to my clients when it comes to goals. Like, we create avatars for who they're becoming 20, 30, 40, 50, 60 years down the road, because that's who they're becoming. People generally have higher resolution on who they desire to become. Now, as far as like goals that they're looking to accomplish in one of the areas of their life, I recommend never more than 3 to 5 years, because resolution gets fuzzy. Now, I do believe we do have some people on this planet that can see 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years down the road. I think we have people like an Elon Musk or a Bill Gates, people like that who have that high resolution. Now, I guess to defend that position a little bit, I do believe that the longer the time frame we're responsible for, I might need to unpack this a little bit, so please let me know if I do. There's this idea that the larger the time frame we're responsible for, the more, I'm going to use income here, it gives us a greater opportunity for greater amounts of wealth. So I guess let me unpack that a little bit. Take a drive-through, right? Like a fast food restaurant, like a drive-through. The person working the window, they may have like a 15-second interaction with a customer. They get paid minimum wage, maybe a little bit more, right? Well, then you have a shift manager who's responsible now for, let's call it 8 hours a day. They're responsible for that full 8 hours, making sure things run smoothly. They get paid more than the person working the drive-through. Well, then you have the general manager who's responsible for a quarter or for a year. They get paid more. Then you have the person responsible for the next, 10, 20, 30, 40, 50 years. They're the big vision thinkers. They're responsible for more time, hence greater wealth. And there are other ways of looking at this level of abstraction, abstract to specific. There are a lot of different ways of looking at this. And there is something about thinking into the future. Just when setting goals, I recommend at most 3 to 5 years out. And the strategy that I use with clients, and I learned this from one of my mentors, and it's a phenomenal strategy. It's called celebrate at 90%. And what this does for people, let's say someone has big career goals, right? And I happen to rein them in a little bit, and they set a goal 1 year out. Cool. Once they hit 90% of their goal, what we're going to do is take that last 10% and have that be the part of their next goal. So they're always using that momentum. So this is how we put all these together: release work, create a compelling future, take action, maintain focus. And another model, and we had talked about this before we were recording, and when I'm happy to go into this once we get to taking action. So again, release work, create a compelling future, take action, maintain focus. Once someone gets to taking action, they have to know what they want. Then they take action, have sensory acuity, have behavioral flexibility. They operate from a physiology and psychology of excellence. Well, the idea of sensory acuity is an awareness of whether we're moving further from or closer toward our goal. Well, once someone gets to 90% of their goal, then they're going to craft a new goal, and then they may have to run each of the processes again. So we're always running these three, I call them models: four requisites for change, 5 principles of success, and celebrate at 90%. If we're always releasing the stuff holding us back, we always have a goal that we're taking action on, maintaining focus. And as we take action, we have this sensory acuity, we have behavioral flexibility, we're operating from a physiology and psychology of excellence, and we're always celebrating at 90% and creating a new goal using that last 10% to keep the momentum going. We're always moving forward.
Forgive me, 5 what? Sorry, did you say?
5 principles of success. Traditionally in NLP, there were 4 and 1 was added. And now we have the 5 principles of success.
It's interesting that you only go over 3 to 5 year period typically when I've heard of, like you said, maybe bigger thinkers, the Bill Gates, the Elon Musk is thinking in 10, 20 years in the future. But the truth is our lives change so much, or can change in the blink of an eye, that looking beyond 3 or 5 years, I think for most people it's going to be somewhat pointless unless we are those visionaries that live in around our society.
Well, oh, please forgive me.
No, you go.
Oh,
Please go.
so yeah, and again, like the purpose of me being here is not to like squash people's thinking, right?
No,
Like
not
I
at all.
believe right? I believe in having a direction, right? Because when and this is part of a compelling future too, we have aim goals and we have end goals. Aim goal is the thing that we're moving toward. End goals are kind of the stepping stones along the way. And I believe people need both, because if we just have an aim goal without end goals, it just feels like a pipe dream. If we have end goals without an aim goal, then we're constantly stuck asking the question, and now what? So,
Yeah, for sure.
Alex Ramosi, as you mentioned, Bill Gates, Elon Musk, they may have the vision of what the end goals look like along the way. I would suggest to anyone to have a direction that may go beyond 3 to 5 years. I just think the specifics get fuzzy after 3 to 5 for many people.
And that's probably where the 90% rule comes in, where you reframe things once you've got to a certain stage, because you need to have those, what was it? You said aim goals. Do you have any suggestions for someone trying to think about their goals? We've all got that end goal, and maybe for some people it's the second house, or a wonderful relationship, or a promotion. How do you pick that apart and find aim goals to, use as those stepping stones along the way?
So, by virtue of doing the release work first, what I'm about to say drastically shifts for people. And someone not going through a breakthrough session, one thing that I would recommend to someone is, in my experience, that when you ask people what they want, they're crystal clear on what they don't want. They don't know what they're moving toward. Why are you working out? I don't want to be fat. Something like that, right? I don't want to be squishy, right? I don't want to be out of shape. This is why, even languaging something like this, well, what's the goal? The goal is to lose 10 pounds. That's moving away from what we don't want, rather than something like create a healthy lifestyle. That's moving toward. So for most, in my experience, for most people, it's getting crystal, not all people, and some people may be dialed in on this already. A lot of people focus on what they don't want, trying to avoid that or moving away from that. And any goal born out of pain that doesn't shift to something that they're moving toward, if a goal is born out of pain, once the pain disappears, the goal disappears. Because if we need that negative impetus to drive us, and that goes, it's like, for example, someone's like, well, I'm doing this for my parents' approval. Well, what happens once it gets their parents' approval? Like the
You
reason
lose the
goes
reason why you're
away.
doing it. Yeah, interesting. Yeah.
So initially I would suggest for people, if they aren't already doing this, to be crystal clear on what they want rather than what they don't want. There's a difference between, getting rid of anxiety and living a calm life.
Yeah, very true. And again, that's how you frame it in your mind, isn't it?
Yes, and our minds, our unconscious minds, don't process negatives directly. That if I say don't think of a blue house, you have to think of the blue house before you don't think of it. So if I'm constantly saying lose weight, I'm focused on the weight. If I'm constantly saying relieve anxiety, I'm focused on the anxiety, because I have to think of it before I don't think of it. If the goal is don't be broke, I'm focused on being broke, because we don't process that. We don't process negatives directly.
Can I ask you, before we go on to step 3?
Hmm?
I said to you before, my goal is to ensure that people don't go through what
Yeah,
I went through.
I
Is
heard
that
that.
a poor?
Yes.
Is that a poor goal because it's a negative?
So, well, here's the thing. Again, if it's, are you familiar with David Goggins?
Yeah, legend. Can't wait to have him on the podcast one day when I get there.
I love that.
Crazy
All
man,
right.
but legend.
Love it. He's someone who I believe that uses the pain as positive motivation, right? And I think that he's somewhat of an outlier, because he's able to use that, to the best of my ability, to discern this through his books and hearing him on podcasts and stuff, right? So I've never met the man, so I don't know specifically. And he uses that. He's got the sticky notes, on his mirror and that type stuff. So can someone use that as fuel? Yes. And that idea of people not going through what I went through, I think there's honor in that. Like I appreciate the goal, and is there something like what's on the other side of it for them? Like it's to help people it's to help people live a life of congruency, or help people live a life of happiness and joy, or even something like pain free is still moving away from the pain. So if
Totally.
it's working, then keep doing it. And I'm not inside your head.
No, that's only me. I mean, I'm really glad I had you on because I invited you on to give you a chance to show yourself and also allow my audience to learn some things. But I feel like I'm learning a lot for myself. So I'm very grateful that you've decided to step in. On that note, take action is step 3. Once we have our goals set and you have your end goals, but you also have your aim goals, which are your stepping stone to walk towards, I've learned that you can only go as far as your next step. Or that was something I used to believe in because we do have different goals over different timelines. And I think a lot of people get stuck in that they don't take action and they don't take that next step. What is your opinion on what I've just said? And how do you have a different opinion on taking action?
So one thing I think that's important to point out is that taking action is step 3, right? It's not number 1. It's very close to the end of the list. And I think sometimes we get stuck. I generalize on these things, right? I say most people, or I
Well,
say we,
you
and
make sense.
so the something like just do it. I love Nike's slogan, right? And I think it's terrible practical advice. And so in the world of personal development, I'm going to stay in my lane here. It's I believe that a lot of people, a lot of successful people are very they aren't great at identifying what it was that drove their success. And there's this meme that used to float around. I'm sure it's still out there. It's something along the lines of, every successful person I know, when presented with a challenge, they just said, F it, I'll figure it out later. Something along those lines. Well, the challenge with that is the way that I see this happening, right? And I'm basing this on what I've studied. In order for someone to utter the phrase, I'll figure it out later, that I can't see a world where that is not preceded by the belief that they can figure it out. I wouldn't be able to make the statement, I'll figure it out later, if I didn't think I could figure it out, right? It just, I can't see a world where that happens, right? So,
And may I jump in? There's a difference
yeah,
between I'll try and figure it out later. I'll
that,
figure it out
right.
later and I'll try and they're two very different trains of thought.
Correct. And yes, thank you for the nuance there. You're right. And that's why, like, I'll figure it out later. That's got to, now, even if someone were to say, because there still has to be a belief preceding, I'll try to figure it out later, they still have something below the surface in, like, that's formulating the idea that they're even willing to try. Like, all of those conscious thoughts are still preceded by beliefs and values held below the surface. So, this is one of those areas with taking action. This is why, part of the reason why the release work is so important, that we're working through these things to get rid of the blocks that are preventing people from taking action. That if they're stuck on something, we have to get rid of the stuff that isn't them so they can move forward 100% who they are, focus on what they want rather than what they don't want. So yes, like with the taking action, we've worked to release those blocks, emotional baggage, limiting beliefs, inner conflicts, that type stuff. And that taking action is based on a model that they've collected during the creating the compelling future process. Because now, if they've, when someone does this work, they've identified potentially a model. Maybe they're modeling their success in another area of their life, or they've gone outside themselves to find someone who has created similar results. We've identified beliefs and values they hold. We may have used some NLP techniques to install those in the individual, and then they start taking action. I believe that actions run out where beliefs and values run out. So that's important. Like, we're modeling all aspects of that model.
There's a lot there to unpack. Well, okay, let's say that we have shifted someone's beliefs and we have done the release work and we have got to the point where we are ready to taking action on a compelling future. I guess there are different ways you can take action over different timelines in different ways, depending on what your goals are. It sounds like a very personal and complex part of the process. I thought perhaps that taking action was going to be one of the easier steps, but maybe it's something that people really need help with. Have I understood that correctly?
Well, I, without having gone through the process, right? So I like that because this is so experiential that by the time they've done those first two steps, the release work and the
Mm,
creating and compelling future, they well, it, and this is where like what are we talking about with the first step? So two questions that I like. One comes from a book called The One Thing. It's by Gary Keller and Jay Papasan. He asked this thing called the focusing question. He says, what's the one thing that such by doing it, it makes everything else completely, or it makes everything else easier or completely unnecessary? Another question similar to that is, if you had nothing else to do, what is the very next thing you would do to move closer toward your goal? Now, here's the thing about this that I've heard this a lot. You set a goal, then you take massive action. Well, if your goal is to go to the gym tomorrow, what's the one thing that if you were to do it right now, it would make going to the gym tomorrow easier? That may be putting out your clothes at night so you don't have to worry about it in the morning. I want to go to the gym after work tomorrow. Maybe that's putting your clothes in your car so you don't have to come home first. We're looking for the first domino. And Gary Keller explains this concept in the book, The One Thing, that a domino can knock down another domino 50% bigger than itself. So what's fascinating about that is it doesn't take very long until you're knocking down a domino the size of the Eiffel Tower. So yes, massive action is important to a certain extent. I need people to do something toward their goal. So once we do the release work, create the compelling future, and we've identified a model, what needs to happen in the next 24 hours? What's something you can do in the next 24 hours to take that first step? And that's what we're looking for.
And that's where it's key that we stick to the new, I guess, because you have a limiting belief, you look to replace that with a positive belief or a reinforcing belief. It's important that we don't flip back to the old limiting belief that would have held us back, because I'm almost thinking of the first step of taking action as being eradicating that limiting belief. You've still got to maintain that clarity on the new beliefs that you have so that you can take action. I reckon it must be difficult for some people, although they've gone through the process with you, they've got rid of their limiting belief, they've created that compelling future. When it comes to taking action, they still have that fear and they can flop back to that old limiting belief. Do you see that a lot?
There's some nuance here in how we're describing these things. So we can have unconscious momentum, meaning that we're so used to doing things certain ways that's just how we continue, and we aren't coping or navigating the belief. And that's why it's release work, not like coping work or navigating work. So once the belief has shifted, and so we aren't replacing it with anything necessarily, like we do have techniques to do that. We're just getting rid of it. So once it's gone, they may have some unconscious momentum thinking that's just how life is. Because we're talking about our unconscious, this isn't a conscious thought process. And I'll give you an example with anger. Let's say you're driving in your car and someone cuts you off, and let's say you get angry. My hallucination is, Chris, that if that were to happen, you did not sit there and say, okay, someone cut me off, time to get angry. You just felt like you just got angry.
Mm.
Well, so let's say someone were to go through and do this work, release emotional baggage around anger and traffic and whatnot, and then the next day they're driving in their car and someone cuts them off and they don't get angry, they also didn't make that choice. They didn't sit there and say, someone cut me off. Now, there are people who try to have this conscious awareness 24/7, and that's a challenging way to go about this. So when we release it, they don't go back to it, and they also aren't aware necessarily. Like oftentimes with my clients, other people recognize they're operating differently. So because the belief isn't there, they may have some unconscious momentum, and that's only because they remember what it was like. It's no longer there. And then that's where coaching picks up. So the breakthrough session, it can be by itself, release work, create a compelling future. Then if someone wants help taking action and maintaining focus, I'm there. If somebody already has a model of success, I have some clients where like I have these 8 different areas of life as I label them. I have some clients who all 7 or the other 7 areas, they may be crushing it. There's just something here that's holding them back, and they don't have a goal. So we do that, and they already know how to take action. So taking action and maintaining focus, that's where my coaching picks up. Some people don't need the help taking action because we've done so much work prior to it.
A bit interesting. You spoke earlier about doing uh, a 3 lesson package. I assumed that was taking someone through the all 4 requisite steps. But everyone's different, aren't they? It comes back to that thought I had earlier that everyone is different. We all have different needs and what individually we need help being served with. It sounds like, I must give you a compliment. You're very good at everything you do and you know how to help clients at all different stages. I'm massively impressed.
Well, I appreciate that. And it's like I tell my clients, I'm a one-trick pony. It just happens to be a pretty cool trick, right? So this idea that everyone's needs are different. Oh, and to clarify, like the breakthrough session is only the first 2 requisites. That's what the 12 hours do. It helps with the release work and then the creating the compelling future.
I was going to ask that. Interesting. Okay.
Yeah. And then the coaching would be taking action and maintaining focus. And some clients do both. Some people only do the breakthrough session. It's a very, very rare situation where I would coach someone without a breakthrough session because coaching is just easier for me and them if we aren't handling their baggage all the time and putting out fires. Now, when it comes, so yes, the release work, creating a compelling future, everyone is different. And because I'm working with their stuff, there's not a situation. And again, like I draw lines on who I will and will not work with. I'm not a licensed medical professional, right? So like there are certain things that I just won't take on. If someone is in my wheelhouse though, right? And I'm not crossing any lines with therapists, psychologists, or anything like that, and it's something that I'm allowed to handle, we'll say, or I feel morally okay handling it. Well, if someone is in that space, everyone is different. And that process, I have trouble or I'm challenged thinking about a scenario where releasing the limiting beliefs and emotional baggage first doesn't make creating the goal easier. I'm challenged to think of a scenario where creating a goal before taking action doesn't make taking action easier. I'm challenged thinking of a place where when we're taking action, we aren't more likely to hit our goal if we maintain focus. So because those are such broad categories, everyone I work with goes through those 4 requisites. Now, the tools we use in each of those, that can change, right? The order always stays the same. And I like the example that Tony Robbins gives that, he talks about the order of these things. He doesn't teach this process. And for the processes he teaches, he says, it's like if I were to give you my phone number, if I were to give you all 10 digits and you rearrange them, you wouldn't get in touch with me. So you have to do them in the right order. So given that order, anyone that I'm going to work with, that order works. And I won't rule it out. Maybe I come across someone where taking action before release work makes sense. That's just a challenging world for me to envision.
Yeah, and I can think of some very rare circumstances where someone is stuck in a very particular way and they need help taking action before to get past that step before you go back and revisit the release work. But you have to question why someone would need help taking action if they were that crystal clear on their goals. The two go hand in hand. It doesn't make sense for someone to come to you just to help you take action, like you said.
Well, I would
I'm
push.
intrigued.
Well, please forgive me.
Hit me. No, hit me.
So,
Go on.
and maybe we're saying the same thing. And I just want to clarify here that if
I think
someone
we might be.
were, so if someone were to say though, like I need and I forget how you phrase this, like in those rare situations where someone would need to take action before they can even get to the release work. Well, actions I believe are driven by beliefs and values. So in order for them to take action, it would still be some form of release work. Like there's so so if I believe, like I've had to work with clients before even doing the breakthrough session where there were some limiting beliefs of even letting go of the stuff that they wanted to release. It's still release work prior to taking action.
Yeah, I was
So,
I was wrong
yeah.
actually. I was thinking. Sorry to interrupt you. I was
Yeah.
thinking of say a woman who wanted to leave an abusive relationship, and the the taking action was actually getting up and leaving, so she could get to the point where she wanted to reframe a new compelling future. But the truth is, there's something holding her back from leaving. So there's a limiting belief there that she would need to get through to help her step away. But also, I don't know, maybe this is also outside of your field as it's
Mm-hmm.
getting into more therapy rather than coaching as such.
Yeah, and when I talk about staying in my lane, that is because of the severity of the challenge, right? Like if
Sure.
someone is a harm to themselves or other people, that's not in my wheelhouse, right? Like I would feel unethical taking something like that on. What the people I generally work with are people where like life would be great if it like I had a client years ago. It had been 3 years since a bad divorce and she just was hung up on this divorce, right? It didn't require therapy. That like none of that was there. She wasn't a harm to herself or others. She just had this thing where she just identified with this divorce and we let it go and she moved on. So, yes, that for me, the process is still the same. It's just the severity of it that I wouldn't touch.
It must be frustrating sometimes, given how accomplished you clearly are, that there are some things that ethically, professionally, you're not able to take on, even though you think you could do a good job. I guess you must find that difficult, even from an egotistical way almost, knowing that you could do the right thing and help someone, but it's, like you said, not in your wheelhouse.
And I think you'll appreciate this having a podcast that, there are 8 billion people on the planet roughly. I mean, if you get a very, very small fraction of those to listen to your podcast, you're crazy successful, right? There are enough people out there. And yes, there are some people where I hear what they're going through. I'm like, man, if I could just give this a shot, sure, right? That absolutely is the case. And fortunately, there are enough people out there that, someone's holding them back. Um, there are situations where I've worked with people after they've done everything else. Like I used to joke with some of my clients. I'm like, I was plan Z, right? It wasn't even plan B or plan C. I was literally the last thing you tried. And I'm okay with that. I'm glad I was the thing that worked and that's awesome. Right.
Well,
I won't step on someone else's toes though.
no, but the last thing you tried is always the most successful thing because you don't need to try anymore, right? So
Well,
it's also a compliment.
it's so funny you say that. So yes, in those cases, it's a compliment. I was talking to someone last night about this. It's often, or I've also run into the conversation where someone's like, I went through this type of therapy. It was the best thing I ever did. Well, it's the only thing you ever did, right? So yes, if someone's been through a lot, I take it as a compliment. If it's the only thing someone's done, it's the best thing they've done. It's not really the best. It's just the only thing they've done. And any order is better than absolute chaos, right? Any order is better than absolute chaos. So if someone tried anything and life got marginally better than it being terrible, they're still going to feel fantastic.
May I ask you a personal question? You don't have to answer, but do you ever consider going to study therapy or psychology or something in that vein that would give you the professional freedom to be able to take on, to expand your wheelhouse and be able to take on people that you otherwise wouldn't be able to?
That's a great question. Um, so, yeah, and I'm in trouble sharing this, that the things that cross my mind about going down some of those avenues and a primary motivator would be able to take insurance because I
Mm.
can't take insurance
That's
right
a
now,
very
right?
American problem, isn't it? Really, a North American problem.
Right. Yes. Yeah, I forgot we're different parts of the world, right? So being able to take
Right.
insurance would be a benefit. The other part of that is that coaching, at least in the United States, is unregulated. There are some restrictions. Like I have friends who have some of the tools that I have, and they also by the way. Because of the structure of insurance, for example, they can only work with people in 1 hour increments. So there's some give and take there that right now, I do kind of have free reign over. Like, if I were to say, hey, you know what, I want to be completely unethical, I'm just going to call myself complementary medicine. And I could probably find some ways of working with people that I don't currently work now. And that's probably the case. Right. And insurance was a big one for me as far as like wanted to take on some of that extra stuff. It may be worth it, and I don't know. I just insurance was the primary reason I even considered it. And right now, I have clients, and I feel like it's good work so far. So I don't know if I'll get that itch again and want to pursue something. So we will see.
It's something I think about. I mean, just having spoken to you, I'm interested in learning more about NLP and becoming a coach myself. I know you're a trainer. It's a conversation we must have maybe off the record or privately.
Mhm.
I'll pick up that up with you at the end. Let me
Very good.
finish off this conversation by going
Mhm.
on to step 4, maintaining focus.
Mhm.
And for someone who was used to be a little bit ADHD, or I say, okay, I was diagnosed with ADHD. I would have
Mhm.
trouble concentrating, staying motivated, but that more came from my self esteem. But I do recognize the need to maintain focus, and I can see the difficulty in maintaining focus unless you're completely driven by something, as I am now. It's not always easy. What advice do you have for someone on that front?
So, what I advise my clients to do is there are several things we can piece together here. So, one of them is having a compelling future, right? And I have these, again, I mentioned earlier, these 8 areas of life that how I've kind of broken up someone's life, right? So, ideally, what someone has after all of their time working with me, and this takes years to accomplish, going through enough breakthrough sessions and all of the different things in these 8 areas of life, that someone would have a compelling future for each area of life. In each of those areas of life, they're crystal clear on their values. They know what's important to them in each area of life. They also have what we call this big why. And some people talk about like kind of why they're doing what they're doing or their big why for their life. So I have a way of helping people identify and craft that. Then we have this avatar, this person who we're becoming. So what I recommend to clients is at least once a week, review your goals, review your values, look at your big why, look at your avatar, and by simply reviewing those things, it reminds us of what's most important to us. That, there's this idea that fatigue makes cowards of us all. Well, and interestingly, like it doesn't just sound good on a successory poster. There is actually some science to back that up, that as we get more tired, our willpower decreases. So what that means is that on a weekly basis, if we're let's say we're tired and we're thinking about leaving the house to go get some fast food instead of making something at home. Well, if I'm constantly reminded of what's important to me in my physical area of life, my health and nutrition, well, if I'm constantly reminding myself, that helps me maintain focus on the goal. Because when I'm tired, I may forget. So by reviewing those things every single week, we can check in with ourselves and ask, hey, does my schedule reflect my values? Is what I'm about to do this week going to help me become that version of myself that I desire to become? Hey, last week, were there any areas of my life where I felt like I was guilty about something I did? Great. Let me see where I violated my values. So, I'm not the coach that has my clients write their goals 10 times a day. And at a minimum, I recommend, hey, at least once a week, read your compelling futures. What are you excited about? Because if it's crafted well enough, they're going to be fired up to go get it. If they're looking at their values, they're then reminded of what's most important to them and they can make decisions based on those things. So for me, that's what maintaining focus is. It's keeping those things in front of us, because when things are going well, it's not that people won't work when things are going well. It's a little bit easier if you're feeling good to go out there and do good work. I work to prepare my clients for the challenges. And there's a quote that I love, and I'm not sure which branch of military originally said this, and I do think it came from a branch of military, that we don't rise to the occasion, we fall to our highest level of training. So when things go poorly, I want them prepared to be able to still do the work necessary.
I know that quote, and it's bothering me that I don't know where it's come from,
Hmm.
but it's a beautiful one. I'm glad to have been reminded of it. When it comes to maintaining focus, there's so much distraction in the world. And actually, there's more distraction now in the 21st century than there ever has been. To me, it comes back to, like you said, having a vision of the future, thinking about where your goals are, and making sacrifices, both small and incremental, and massive ones, that are going to keep you on the path that you want to be on. The one that I'm drawn to is alcohol. I quit drinking this year, and I'd had the urge to for a long time, but it was only social pressure and wanting to have fun with my friends that
Mhm.
I hadn't done it before now. Now that I've quit alcohol, I've got so much more energy, clarity of thought. I'm no longer tired. I'm not wasting money. And it's become quite an easy sacrifice for me to make. But I think for a lot of people, alcohol is a challenging one to walk away from, but it's all about the little sacrifices you have to maintain the view of who you want to be and where you want to get to in the future. Have I understood that correctly?
The I believe
Sacrifices, I
so,
mean.
and so interestingly, I can talk about the alcohol example as well. So on this past on the 27th of September, that was 10 years since my last sip of alcohol. Now, here's
God
the thing.
damn, we didn't talk about that when we were booking in the session. So
Yeah. Oh, well,
congratulations. I'm seriously proud of you. Well done, because 10 years is a big milestone.
okay. Well, I and this is where I always feel the need to clarify. I'm not sober. I just quit drinking. And the reason why I'm pointing that out is because I'm not battling the demons that some people are, right? For me, I was at my buddy's wedding, and the next day I started training for a marathon. And then I just never started drinking again, right? So that was it. Like I didn't I did like nothing. It wasn't challenging to quit drinking because I started training for a marathon, and then it was just easier, and then I just didn't start drinking again. So I mean, we could potentially call it willpower. There just wasn't a situation where, and then when people would say, "Hey, do you want to drink?" I'm like, "No, I don't drink." It's not that I'm not drinking tonight. I'm just not a drinker, right? That's
Mm.
not something I do, like the billions of other things I don't do. And in my mind, and this was before I started doing all of this work, right? So I didn't know what was going on back then. I wasn't I was focused on running a marathon. I wasn't focused on not drinking. I wasn't focused on having a good time with my friends. I was focused on feeling good in the morning.
Mm.
And there's right. So it's the difference between moving away from or moving toward. And this goes for example, like diet too. When people are, looking to, either weigh a certain amount, lose or gain, it doesn't matter. People will say, well, I can't have ice cream rather than I can have this. So in my mind, even without knowing what I know now, I wasn't giving up anything. I mean, sure, like there were some good times when I was drinking, right? Like I think everyone has those
We've all
stories.
had them. Yeah.
Right. And for me, I also know what it did to me cognitively. I value my mind, and so it's not that I'm not drinking, it's that I'm growing. It's just the other direction, and for me it's not a sacrifice, and I don't know where that happened. I just knew that running a marathon wasn't going to happen if I was drinking, or at least preparing the way I desired to prepare.
No, and you've made a compelling future for yourself in some way, right? Because you envisage yourself being healthier, waking up at a good time, having lost a ton of weight, I'm assuming, because now you can suddenly run 20. Did you complete the marathon? Is the
I
question I
did.
wanted to ask.
I ran that in well, it was kind of interesting how this happened, and I'll be quick on this. So, ran the marathon, and while I was there, the pacer in my group, I said, "So, do you do this often, right? Because when you run a marathon, they have people you can run with, and they'll help you get a certain time." And he's like, "Well, actually, I don't run a lot of marathons. Last weekend, I ran 75 miles. I didn't know ultra marathons were a thing at the time." So I met him. He told me that, and within a week, I signed up for an ultra marathon because I'm like, it took me 4 months to train for a marathon. I can run over 50 miles if I have another 4 months. So I trained that one. I fell short on 43.78 miles out of the 50. And that was an experience. It's a complete, like, that was an experience. And I think that also helped because I wasn't drinking for that either. So that just, the focus there I was on point.
Um,
So yes, I did finish the marathon, fell short on the ultra marathon.
I'll loop back around to the four requisites of NLP coaching. I'm more interested now in this story. Why did you fall short? What happened?
So the race, it was called the Cremator 50. It's run in Butte, or it was. I don't think they run the race anymore. It was called the Cremator 50. It was July in Beaufort, South Carolina. The feel like temperature was well over 100 degrees. So
Yeah, I
and
bet.
and this is an open road race, meaning, like, generally speaking, like marathons, large groups of people, so they like roads blocked off and police officers and things like that. This was an open road race. You wouldn't have even known that there, I think it was like 35 of us or something like that. We're running down like the side of highways, 12 and a half miles out, 12 and a half miles back, 12 and a half miles out, 12 and a half miles back. You wouldn't have known that there was an ultra marathon going on unless you maybe saw an aid station. It really just looked like people going for a run on the side of highways, right? Like literally, like there aren't like flags or anything, like where trucks and cars are next to us. So I was training, I was up to, I don't know, 60 miles a week. I think my tapering, like once I trained up to 35 miles in 30 or 35 miles. I don't remember the end of the training plan. Whatever it was, I trained up to 30 or 35, and I didn't I believe what happened because my legs cramped. I think my nutrition and hydration, just something I didn't get right going into the actual race. Because I was
Oh,
pacing fine. I would have finished if I could have kept running. I wasn't off on pace because they do have a cutoff time. My legs cramped and I just couldn't run anymore.
I mean, Christ, though, 100 degrees Fahrenheit, that's 40 degrees Celsius in Europe. There haven't been many times that I've experienced that level of heat. And when I have, I wasn't trying to run 50 miles in it. And the dehydration you must have experienced is, I mean, mad respect for even trying. I don't blame you for falling short at all.
Well, then this may blow your mind. Other people continued for a second day, did it again, and then another person did it 3 days in a row. So, like, there were levels, like, you got like different trophies or whatever you will if you did it. So, like, there are some animals out there. I mean, there's a race across the country. I mean, people run 100-mile race. I mean, like, there are some, yeah, it's incredible, those endurance runners.
I would label myself an ex crazy person based on my trauma. Someone who runs 50 miles 3 days in a row, it really has got a screw loose in my mind. That's next level mad. I've got a friend from high school. I got in touch with her recently, about a week ago. I found out she did an Ironman while 4 months pregnant.
Yeah.
So I guess the ability of the human body to do some crazy, crazy achievable things when you have the right goals, the right mindset, things are possible.
There was a guy here several years ago here in the United States that did a full Ironman. Like, they weren't official Ironman, right? They were just the distances
The
for the
distances.
run. Yeah, for the swim, run, bike, or swim, bike, run. All the distances, 50 states, 50 days
Oh God, fit in a row.
in a row. 50 days,
50
50 days
Ironmans
in
in
a
a row.
row. Yeah, in all 50 states. So think about the travel.
I
Yeah,
mean, that is someone I want to interview. Is this one person or is this a few people did it? Or
one
is it
per.
one guy?
They call him the Iron Cowboy. I forget his last name.
I will have to look this man up. I'm just going to write 50 and 50. Ray, I'm conscious of the time. I mean, we've been going for an hour and a half, which is what we scheduled for. I think you and I could talk a lot longer and more often. I'd love to have you back. I've really enjoyed talking about the four requisites, and I feel like I've learned a lot from you. I want to give you the chance to wrap up, and I'd also like to take information about what it is you provide, courses, the work you do, so that people who watch the podcast can reach out to you, particularly if they're in your area. Do you speak to people face to face, or are you working over webcam like we are now?
It's via Zoom. I actually have a client over there in Europe. She's in London.
Okay, cool. Well, here's your chance. Your website is
Yes, thank you for asking. My website is My Coach Ray. So My Coach Ray, that's the name of my business, mycoachray.com. And then on there, that has information about the breakthrough session, NLP coaching. Right now, I am running a hypnosis series through the end of the year. This is free. It's at 10:30 a.m. Eastern time. I'm on the East Coast of the US on Thursdays. Anyone can register and sign up. I think between now and the end of the year, not including holidays here in the US, there are 11 Thursdays that I'm running them. So people can hop on and we're going to do some cool work there. So there's both free stuff as well as paid services on my website. That's all there. And then I also have raychaffardinijr.com. So it's just my name, RAYCIAF as in Frank, ARD as in David, INIJR.com. That'll take you to my link tree that has my social platforms as well as I just started this new site or it's on a new platform called Buy Me a Coffee, and that's where I post content. So I post articles about NLP and other strategies and things like that. There's some paid stuff on there. There's some free stuff. So again, anywhere you go, I have free offerings, I have paid offerings, and I feel like there's something for everyone out there. And if I have an opportunity to talk to someone and there's an opportunity to work together, I'd love to have that conversation. So thank you, Chris, for allowing me to share those things.
Oh man, of course. I mean, you've given me enough in an hour and a half that I've learned a lot myself, and I would love to continue the conversation another time. I think you and I are going to connect again once I hit stop on the recording, and I will post a whole host of link to Ray's stuff on my socials, Instagram, TikTok. Although I feel like the TikTok generation might not be listening to this, and YouTube as well. Um, but Ray, thank you very much. I think it's been a wonderful episode. Really appreciate you coming on, and I'd love to have you on again some other time. if you're
I,
more than welcome to come back, if you're willing to come back.
I love the opportunity. I've loved all of our conversations so far on and off camera. So I appreciate that, Chris.
Ray, thank you very much. I appreciate you.
Have a good day.
Stay there.